me with the people. Elizabeth, why does he have to make it so hard on himself? For Christ's sake.
No matter how big I get, no matter who I fight, no matter what I do, I ain't never gonna fight Joe Louis.
Yeah, that's right. He's a heavyweight, you're a middleweight. We know that.
I ain't never gonna get a chance to fight the best there is. And you know something? I'm better than them.
The man's got a head of rock.
It's just that when he gets something on his mind, he's got a hard head, he likes to do things his own way. He's gonna do what he wants to do, he wants to make it on his own, Thinks he can make it on his own.
Make it on his own. He thinks he's gonna walk in there and become champion on his own. And he's got no respect for nobody. He doesn't listen to nobody. That's not crazy.
I'm tired of having to turn around and having both of you up my ass all the time.
He's just been a contender too long. He'll be all right as soon as he gets his shot.
Jake, there's never gonna be a chance. Too many people hate him.
He ain't gonna get a shot at that title, not without us, he ain't.
Hey, welcome back to Dave's Movie Diary. I'm Dave. Before I get into this pod, I just wanted to reiterate a couple of things. The first one being that I'm no expert on films. I'm just this guy who's been obsessed with films for about 40 years, and I love talking about them. And I've heard other podcasts with people talking about films all the time, and most of them are in the industry or they've got links to the film industry. Some don't, but I wondered if maybe there was space in this crowded time we find ourselves in with lots of podcasts out there for just an average guy to talk about the films that he's watched and what he thinks about them, and whether that might resonate with other people out there. So that's what I'm trying to do with these pods. And if anyone's listening and finds them interesting, awesome. I'm really just enjoying doing the pods, to be honest. For some reason, they're making me concentrate on the films more, and I'm noticing more. It's funny how your brain works, isn't it? So yeah, I'm just an average guy, family man. Been married for close to 25 years. I've got a couple of kids who are nearly 19 and nearly 21. I don't have any background in the industry. I've just grown up watching them when in a time when films were really at the center of the culture, and everyone, well, most people back then were engaged in talking about films and watching them a lot. And that was in the time of the dinosaurs, before we had the internet and other cool things like that. So very different times. And yeah, I thought it might be interesting to contrast maybe some of the reactions that I had to films back then and that I still watch now, and seeing what the difference is in me. The films haven't changed at all. It's I've changed, society's changed. And so yeah, just talking about that sort of stuff feels like fun to me, and hopefully someone else out there is getting some value. All right, Raging Bull. This is one of my favorite films of all time, made by just about the best director of all time. I don't think anyone's better than Martin Scorsese. I'd probably rank a couple of other directors alongside him. I can't go past Stanley Kubrick. I'm showing the generation I grew up with here, to be honest. But yeah, Scorsese to me is just unbeatable. He brings so much to his films. They're entertaining. They're socially relevant. They are all about great performances, great music. And he's managed to stay relevant for so long. This one was one of the first ones that I sought out when I really got heavy into movies, when I was, mid-teens, and probably saw it when I was about 16 or 17 years old. and I've just kept watching it again and again and again. It's not the ultimate rewatchable film that you can just put on all the time. You've really got to be in the right mood to watch it. But if you are, there's so much to appreciate in this film. Apart from De Niro, who I'll talk about in more detail, it's just the way it's shot, the sound of the film, the way that Scorsese got the performances out of the actors, the intensity of it, the surprising things about it, and it stayed with me ever since the first time I've watched it. My perspective of it has changed over time, as you'd expect, but that's part of the fun of talking about it. So, like I said, I grew up watching a lot of Scorsese, and that was my choice. Up until then, I just used to watch whatever my parents watched, and I'll just paint a quick picture for you about life in Australia in the 70s and 80s before VHS became prevalent. This is how it worked. If you lived in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane or one of the capital cities, you used to get Channel 9, Channel 10, Channel 7, and you get ABC. So probably in the late 70s, I think it was, early 80s, SBS came in. So you had 3 commercial free-to-air networks, and then you had the 2 government-run networks. And you were at their mercy. So whatever got put on there, that's what you watched. So typically with movies, you'd wait until Sunday night. And this is if you lived in a capital city, mind you. You would get a choice of 3 films at 8:30 on Channel 7, 9 and 10. And that would be their premiere movie of the week, right? So that'd usually be a film that they maybe hadn't shown before, or a really big film that they had showed and that would come back by popular demand. But generally it was for first release films. Separate to that, you might have on Saturday nights, you'd have 2, 3, or sometimes 4 movies in a row, starting from around, 6:30 probably after the news. The first one would be like a family-friendly movie. Then at 8:30, you'd have a film maybe that had been on the Sunday premiere, the year before, a couple of years before. So it wasn't gonna get the ratings that the Sunday night one would, because this is what it was for commercial networks. It was all about ratings, and the networks would measure ratings, and they'd choose films appropriately. So anyway, you'd get like a second tier film at 8:30 that was still pretty good. So typically maybe a James Bond film, or a film that wasn't too heavy or too serious on a Saturday night. So that'd be 8:30. Depending on the length of the film and all the ads they'd stack into it, which grew over the years, that might be finished by 10:30, 10:45. And then you get another film that's probably more likely going to be an action film or a sci-fi or a horror film that would go until 12:30, and generally you'd get another one then, and that would be like an old classic usually. Saying that, on Sunday afternoons around 2 or 3 o'clock, you'd sometimes get an old classic on one of the networks as well. You might get an Elvis Presley movie, you might get a John Wayne Western, something like that, and that was basically it. Through the week, maybe after midnight, they'd chuck one in there as well, just to have something on that didn't cost them anything and was out of the ratings period, because the ratings usually cut out after about 10:30 or something, I think. ABC and SBS joined the fray, and ABC eventually would have like a movie of the week on a Friday night, I think, from memory. And SBS used to typically have more films more often, and they were of the initially mainly of the European subtitle variety, and then they started to get a bit kinky and a bit interesting, and you'd see all sorts of things on SBS late at night that you hadn't seen on other networks, or you'd see films that the other networks had run and they'd cut them to bits and cut out all the really interesting stuff and the really interesting language and themes. You know what I'm saying here? And so then you'd have more films there, but they were really left of center if they were in English, or they might be Australian content that was underground, or really cool old stuff that was a bit different, that had an edge to it. So you had a decent choice back in the day, but you were stuck. You had to watch it then, or you missed out, and maybe that film wouldn't come back for 2 or 3 years. This is before VHS. Then in the early 80s, VHS came out, initially with a fairly limited run of films. So it was the films that you'd expect, the big budget films. And then throughout the 80s, the range steadily expanded until by the late 80s, which is when I came along, and we got a VHS. I always felt like we were the last family in Australia to get one in about 1987. I was chomping at the bit to dive into these films that I'd been reading about for a couple of years, devouring those. There was a guy called Leonard Maltin that used to put out this phone book kind of size, not size, but thickness, just of movies with a short synopsis, who was in it, and a rating. And he was like a respected Hollywood critic. He used to put out these guides for, 30 years or more. And I used to get them, and I'd go through, and all I used to do was look at the year of release, and I'd go back a little bit, but I sort of wouldn't go back too far then, and I'd just look at the ratings, and I'd make a note of them, and then I'd highlight them in this book once I'd seen them. So super nerdy. I used to hide this away. I didn't let anyone see it. God knows I wouldn't admit to doing something geeky like this. But that's what I did, and that's how I kind of built up my film knowledge, and I ended up being the go-to to pick the films that my folks and I watched, and even a lot of the time with my mates, I'd recommend things, and I don't know, 9 times out of 10 I'd get it right. I'd be able to gauge the situation, what sort of mood we're in, what we're doing afterwards, what we'd done before, who we were with, and I'd take the punt. We never used to get films we'd seen, so it was you're putting yourself out there, and God help you if you got it wrong. So I'm rambling here about the olden times, but just to paint the picture about what it was like way before. This is 15 years, 10 or 12 years before DVDs became popular, changed the landscape again. And then the streaming services came out in the 2010s to where we are now, where you're spoilt for choice, but are you? There's heaps of films you can watch now, but I'd argue that back in the VHS days, at least, possibly the DVD days, but definitely the VHS days, there was a much wider range of films. Yes, you had to pay for them, but you could pick from a lot more films that were quality. But again, I'm biased. I come from that age. So anyway, it's my show. I can say what I like. All right, getting back into it. Scorsese. So I'd been doing all my research. I'd been flicking through these film guides. I'd been keeping an eye out. I knew that this Scorsese guy looked really cool and interesting. I heard about Taxi Driver. I heard about Raging Bull. I heard about King of Comedy, Mean Streets, and Robert De Niro. I'd had a grounding in Robert De Niro from my parents. They're the sort of people that have seen more films than probably just about most people I know except me, because they watched so many with me. But they just went along with what I watched, and eventually, like when I was 15, I was picking the movies all the time. And similarly, I seemed to be able to pick the right ones for us to watch. And what they gave me in return was, they told me about certain films that they'd liked in the 70s, particularly, or the 60s. Like they told me about Deliverance. They told me about The Godfather. They told me about Jaws, or film. Not always films that they liked. Sometimes they said they didn't like films, and that probably made me want to watch them even more. I can remember them being pretty anti Apocalypse Now, and I watched that and I thought, you're crazy. This is the best war film I've ever seen. and they hadn't seen any of these Scorsese films. They'd missed out. You know, I was a young kid by then. They weren't going to the movies as much. Probably arguable whether they would have gone to see Taxi Driver in 1976 anyway. But they grew to love these films. So, getting back to De Niro, I can remember when they went out one night and I got looked after by someone else to see a little film called The Deer Hunter. And I don't think they knew too much about it. And I can remember them coming home and they looked shocked because The Deer Hunter was one of the first movies to really document the Vietnam War accurately, to portray PTSD. And I mean, anyone who's seen The Deer Hunter knows that it's a magnificent film, but it's very traumatic on the first viewing. You've got the Christopher Walken with the Russian roulette and all sorts of other things. So I remember them coming home anyway and being wowed by Robert De Niro. And then at certain points, I guess when his name was mentioned or he was in other films, they were both in awe of this Robert De Niro. And I thought, yeah, this, he sounds exotic, De Niro. He sounds, he looked interesting. He was in different kind of roles and they were all edgy and controversial and serious. And so I had him marked as well. And what happens? I got the perfect marriage over, as it turns out, 8 or 9 films with these two, Scorsese and De Niro, together in the partnership that still went all the way up to 2019 or whenever The Irishman was released. Sorry, actually, De Niro was also in another film with DiCaprio recently, a couple of years ago. The name escapes me. True story about DiCaprio's character living in Indian territory. And yeah, this is what happens when you get old. Your memory starts to fade. Anyway, it's probably 10 films now. So yeah, I was in heaven. And I was looking forward to watching these films. So I started out, I think Taxi Driver was the first one. And wow, I'm still processing that film now, 40 years later. Still watch it regularly. You'll hear me talk about that film another time. And Raging Bull I got to, I want to say next. It was either this or King of Comedy, I think. Vastly different films, but I got it. I remember watching Taxi Driver. I remember watching this and thinking, oh yeah, I probably watched Deer Hunter around then too. And I thought, yeah, I get it. De Niro is the man. And I dug into it a bit, and I probably saw Godfather around that time, so I would have seen him in Godfather Part 2. And the similarities between him and Marlon Brando being the best actors of their respective generations, and both using the method system of acting, where you completely immerse yourself in the character. You don't just switch on when the director says action, you keep it going in the breaks. You act like that for the whole length of the film and sometimes afterwards. And I'm sure I've heard both those actors talking about how hard it is to sometimes get out of the character, which is problematic when you're acting as Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver, and you're a unstable Vietnam vet who wants to clean up the streets of New York literally by shooting pimps and anyone else that doesn't comply with your worldview, dodgy politicians as well. So I was blown away by this idea that movies could be serious. They could be about edgy, culturally relevant, up-to-date things that were on the dark side. And there were people there, like De Niro, to portray these people and really live it. And Martin Scorsese was there to drive the whole thing. So the intensity of the performances and the type of films they were really appealed to, 15 and 16-year-old me. So that's the background to me getting into Martin Scorsese, the Scorsese universe, the De Niro universe as well. And even when De Niro went off and did separate things with other people, I always tagged along. And 95% of the time they were unbelievable. A few times they weren't. Not many. We Know Angels with Sean Penn, there's an example. Some of his, I think The Fan in 96, I remember that not being as good. Generally, though, even in bad movies, he was good. Night in the City is another one that comes to mind. And that film he made with Showtime? Yeah, with Eddie Murphy. Yeah, anyway, getting way off track here, but I love talking about De Niro and Scorsese. So I've got a long history. And when you go through the titles, Taxi Driver, King of Comedy, this, Goodfellas, Casino, in particular, those films will stand the test of time forever. So this isn't a standalone film in my memory. It really sits inside that lifelong cinematic thread that Scorsese has constructed with De Niro as a willing accomplice. On to this film. What's it about? It's about Jake LaMotta. Jake LaMotta is not as well known in the boxing world as many of his contemporaries. He was around in the late 40s and through the 50s, the early 50s to mid 50s. He was a middleweight boxer. He had a particular style that wasn't classical at all. He was a brawler, but he was a systematic fighter who was very effective, and he was brutal, and he was extremely tough, and he won a lot of fights, and he climbed the ladder. That's one side of Jake LaMotta. He retired late 50s or early 60s and ended up owning a nightclub and appearing on stage and cracking jokes quite badly. But charismatic guy, no doubt. And a few years after that, he wrote his autobiography, which talked about his life. And credit to Jake LaMotta, he wrote it as it was, warts and all. And there's a lot of warts here. It's hard to see the skin for the warts, actually. So in amongst fighting in the ring, he was fighting outside of the ring with his wife, with his brother, with associates, with anyone who came near him, actually. Why? Well, he had a lot of jealousy, he had a lot of paranoia, he had a chip on both shoulders. He was just emotionally volatile. He couldn't deal with life outside of the ring, and gradually his career success contrasted with his personal collapse. And the end of that state was isolation and a lot of self-destruction. So the focus of this film is not just his progression through boxing, but his emotional deterioration in life. And that's really what happens in the film. It's not complex. It's just following him, nearly documentary style. Now, I came into this film and on the cover, I can remember the cover, it had a close-up picture of De Niro as Jake LaMotta with a kind of a perm sort of look with his hair, sweat running down his face, probably a mouth guard in, I think, glaring out. And yeah, I knew it was about Jake LaMotta. I'd done my research enough to know that. I knew it was a boxing film. I thought, cool. By then I'd seen a few of the Rockies. I'd probably seen the Charles Bronson film Hard Times, which is a fantastic film set in the 30s about he might have been a bare-knuckled boxer. Anyway, thought, cool, another boxing film. Pop the tape in, and up pops a black and white film. This is 1980, by the way. This film was made 1980. I saw it in 88, probably. Okay, cool. It's in black and white. That used to be a real shock to the system for me at that age. And yeah, I probably saw Psycho around that time, obviously in black and white, made in 1960. I'd seen not a few black and white films, I guess, but I thought, hang on, we've got colour TV. We've had colour TV for 10, 15 years in Australia. Why is this Joker making a film in black and white? I was into film, but I wasn't into film enough, and probably not mature enough to understand why a director might choose to shoot in black and white. Okay, so it's in black and white, and there's a fat guy on a stage with a bad suit, loud suit, puffy face, telling jokes. All right, have I got the wrong tape here? Is this a preview for something else? What the hell? Starting to get really concerned. No, the credits come up. Yeah, okay, it's Raging Bull. Then I realised that fat guy on the stage with the puffed out face, who I'd never seen before. I had seen him before. It was Robert De Niro, and he'd put on 27 kilos for that aspect of the film by eating hamburgers and ice cream and God knows what for 3 or 4 months straight. Once I realised that, I thought, wow, I'd never seen anything like that. I was trying to work out how they did it. Afterwards, I delved much deeper into this film and realised that he just did it for real. He just ate a lot. And then the film kicked it along a bit further, and it goes back in time to Jake LaMotta fighting. I thought, right, yep, this is what I'm looking for. Let's see some in the ring stuff, some boxing action. Cool, got that. Then he comes out of the ring, and I wasn't ready for that part of the film either, because this guy just didn't know when to quit. He was his own worst enemy. He would fire up, and like I said earlier, he was paranoid. He was like a dog with a bone once he got an idea in his head. And he used that to good effect, but mainly to bad effect. Good effect in the ring, being a pretty dedicated trainer for a while, going after what he wanted, but in a bad way. He would pursue his obsessions, and a lot of those obsessions were paranoid obsessions that had no basis in reality, usually to do with his much younger and knockout wife, played by Kathy Moriarty in this film. And there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of profanity, there's a lot of things that I'd never seen anything close to in a film at that point. I'd seen horror movies and other things, don't get me wrong. I live for that side of films, but nothing built up a character and fleshed it out and was done so brilliantly and so seriously and cinematically as Jake LaMotta when he's out of the ring. So I was thrown off guard. I was just glued to that screen, and I got the full effect as intended. Watching him get to the heights of boxing fame, watching him lose it all through his paranoid delusions, alienating everybody in his life and becoming a overweight nightclub owner. I think it was in Miami. You can't make this stuff up. And what stood out for me on the first watch was, like I said, De Niro's physical transformation, De Niro's performance, Joe Pesci's performance. I think the controlled filmmaking, despite the chaotic subject matter as well, they all stood out for me on that first watch. And if I could sum it up in a word, it was that violence wasn't just in the ring, it was everywhere in his life. So it really blew me away. I think it's probably worthwhile. I don't normally do this for these pods. I don't dig into things too much, but I think there are some things worth talking about how this film was made. For Scorsese, making this saved his life. Not just his professional life. I think it actually saved his life. Full stop. For context, he'd been around since the early 70s. He released Mean Streets in 1973 with De Niro and Harvey Keitel. That was a first up classic. He released Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore the next year with Keitel again. Far different film, much quieter but no less staggering in what it achieved. Then Taxi Driver landed in 1976, broke all the rules. Wasn't a big success at the time, but a few years after that, certainly by the turn of the decade and on, it was already being reviewed as a classic. The subject matter is so provocative and edgy, and depicted things in a serious cinematic way that hadn't really been shown before, is my take. And this guy could do no wrong. What did he do? He tried to make a musical in 77 called New York, New York, with De Niro and Liza Minnelli. And it bombed. It bombed really badly, lost a lot of money, and Martin Scorsese lost a lot of his confidence, and he went into a bit of depression and a lot of drug addiction, is my understanding. Coke was really starting to get a hold in Hollywood. And he took a break. Granted, he was working on the documentary about the band, The Last Waltz, that came out in 1978. It's brilliant as well. But it wasn't until 1980 that this film came out. And in between, he ended up in hospital from, in inverted commas, exhaustion. Now, you can take that any way you like. But De Niro went to see him in hospital and said, all right, Marty, maybe it's now time that you listen to me and we make this film about Jake LaMotta that I've been talking about for a few years, ever since I read his autobiography. And Scorsese agreed, and Raging Bull was made, and the rest is history. The film should have won Best Film that year. It didn't. It lost to Ordinary People, the Robert Redford film, which is brilliant too. Robert Redford's first directing time out. De Niro got Best Actor, so there was some justice there. Scorsese should have got Best Director and didn't, to Redford again. So maybe the subject matter wasn't as palatable. Ordinary People is a gritty film too, in a different kind of way, if you've ever seen that film. Anyway, people took him seriously again, and he was able to go on through the 80s, and he arguably had a better 80s than his 70s. Because his 70s he's always talked about as in the 70s group of directors, which he was for sure, with Spielberg and George Lucas and Brian De Palma, William Friedkin, quite a few others. But his 80s were just as impressive in a totally different way. He stepped away and made different kind of films like King of Comedy, like After Hours, Colour of Money, culminating with Last Temptation of Christ in 1988. That's the film he always wanted to make for at least 10 years or so. It's based on a novel by Nikos Kazantzakis, Greek author. It's a hell of a read. Highly recommend it. And he made a lot of decisions in the 80s to get the studios to agree to make that film. But getting back to Raging Bull, he was in a deep funk, physically, emotionally, professionally. De Niro saved him by convincing him to do this film. And then the two of them did their magic, and here we are. A guy like me sitting in a room talking to himself about how good it is. It grossed around $30 million from an $18 million budget, so modest, but culturally massive. It's cited by everyone. It's talked about a bit like the Velvet Underground's first album, that it influenced every single band that came after it throughout the 70s. It's a bit like Woodstock. Everyone says they were there and they weren't really there, in a different kind of way. But I think this film really did influence a lot of people and the next generation. De Niro, what a maniac! He undertook real boxing training, which you'd expect, but he went in some semi-professional bouts as well. I think he won a couple of them, and he worked closely with Jake LaMotta. Jake LaMotta was a technical advisor on the film, and that is staggering. When you watch this film and you realise that the guy it's about was standing there just off stage watching De Niro depict him and doing some obscene things, and I don't know what the comments were. It's just mind-blowing to me that Jake LaMotta was there. He turned up at the Oscars too, and he was cheering for them, so he was obviously pleased with the way it came out. De Niro, like I said, gained 27 kilos for the older version of Jake LaMotta, which takes up, I don't know, half an hour, 25 minutes maybe of this film. And contrast that with the lean, mean fighting machine that he is as Jake LaMotta. Like, you can see every sinew. He's more in that Max Cady kind of build from Cape Fear. Like, the guy is ropey. He is jacked. He is just so believable in the ring, and he's intimidating outside of it. So the discipline is there from De Niro, and the intensity is there. And that gaze, that De Niro gaze that just doesn't move from its target. He's the perfect guy to play Jake LaMotta. And I think when Robert De Niro passes away, this film will have to be mentioned in the first line of his epitaph. Alongside him, just as impressive in a different kind of way, was Joe Pesci as his brother, Joey LaMotta. Early defining role for him, he was a comic, I think, in a nightclub with Frank Vincent, who also appears in this film as the target, the principal early target of Jake LaMotta's paranoid delusions. Well, not totally, actually, to be fair on that point. Frank Vincent in this film, he'd turn up in Goodfellas and other films as well, maybe even The Sopranos. He does have an eye for Kathy Moriarty's character, Vicky LaMotta, Jake's wife. But I don't know. I never got the sense it was a serious thing because he knew what would happen to him if he made a move there. But yes, Joe Pesci and Frank Vincent, they had a nightclub act together, and coincidentally, in this film, Joe Pesci gets to beat the living daylights out of Frank Vincent. It's got a classic scene where he's banging his head with a car door. I hadn't seen that before either. It was an early preview of Joe Pesci characters in Goodfellas and Casino. So he also broke a rib during this film, sparring with De Niro. You can, I think you can even see when it happens in the ring. So Pesci shows a lot of acting chops for a guy who had never done a serious role before. And their dynamic is fantastic. Pesci gets the loyalty element across, but by the end of the film, he's exhausted in dealing with his brother. And when you watch the film, you'll understand why. Kathy Moriarty is Vicky LaMotta. Again, her first role. They found her somewhere in a donut shop, I think, as a waitress, or a Wendy's or something. Scorsese wanted someone fresh-faced. Well, he got it with her. She looks like, again, born to play this role. She's got this classic kind of diva look that just looks right through you. like you weren't even there. She's got to look like she thinks she's too good for you, and that's perfect for this role because that's what Jake LaMotta thought about Vicky LaMotta. So I wonder how much of this Kathy Moriarty was acting, because that seemed to be her. I've seen her in other films, and that's her standard. That's her BAU. She brings a raw, unpredictable energy to this role, and there's a lot of ad-libbing with De Niro. The scene where they meet through the chain link fence is ad-libbed, and it shows. It just looks so natural, and you can see why Jake LaMotta got obsessed with her. She's unbelievable. She is incredible. She's out of his league, and he knows it, and that's where all the paranoid fantasies come from. She's so much younger than him, and she's emotionally unstable. Bad mix with Jake LaMotta, as you'll see when you watch the film. She takes a lot of abuse, but she does it very believably. By now, if you've stuck with me this far, you'll know that I think a lot of things work with this film. De Niro's performance and his transformation undoubtedly won the Oscar. The black and white cinematography that I mentioned at the top that really freaked me out gets better and better every time I watch it. It brings like a memory-like quality to the film. It sets it in that time, in the 40s and 50s. It gives a stark outline to what was going on with all the violence and the brutality in the ring and outside of the ring. The boxing in this film is so realistic. You can see when someone gets hit, there's spray going everywhere, there's blood going everywhere. I'm not sure how they did it, but it looks real. And it looks exhausting. It doesn't just look brutal, it looks exhausting. You can see De Niro shaking his head, and there's all this sweat flying everywhere. And it doesn't look like it's just been sprayed on. It looks like he's earned that sweat. And I don't think boxing has ever looked as real in a film as this. The rhythm of this film, and that's down to the editing. There's lots of quick cuts, especially in the boxing scenes, that keep it in the moment and keep it cutting edge. And it's something else when you think of when this was made, 1980. A lot of films were still quite slow, had slow cuts. And it really escalates the conflict. It happens outside of the ring too, but especially in the ring, I noticed those editing cuts. Joe Pesci's emotionally grounding performance. He's, for the most part, probably the only, in inverted commas, normal person in this film. Everyone else is either highly strung, psychotic, or just out and out crazy. Kathy Moriarty's raw debut, I already mentioned. The constant unpredictability in this film. You never know when the next outburst of violence or rage is coming from, and the actors do an incredible job. Even when I've seen it, I don't know how many times now, 30 times, it still gets me every time. I'm on edge. It's very uncomfortable. So everything feels controlled in this film, even when it's collapsing. What doesn't work in the film? Almost nothing in technical terms or filmmaking ability or performance or all those things that work for me. The sound. Maybe for some people, the real issue is the intensity. Maybe it's too much. Maybe there's just a sheer lack of emotional relief or even a break, like a breathing space, because it is a lot. You don't just, like I said at the top, do not watch this film with a hangover. Do not watch this film if you're not having a great day. Or only do that if you really want to embrace that darkness and try and push through it. Heavy metal music does that for me as well sometimes. Just be aware of it. The intensity is the point of the film. It's not a flaw for me, but some people won't last this film. They won't get far in. They'll be turned off by the violence, the domestic violence, and the crudity of Jake LaMotta. That's fine. That's up to you. But for some people, that won't work. For me, it's the opposite. So like I've said it, this film's got lots of domestic violence. It's got sexual aggression and objectification. It's got profanity from start to finish. There's boxing violence. There's a lot of psychological abuse and emotional instability. It wears you out unless you're up for it and you are into that and you embrace it like I do. It reflects when it was made, and it reflects the 40s and 50s setting, and it reflects this monster. Women are not portrayed well in this film. They're only usually framed in relation to male identity and control. That's sad but true, and that's often the way it was back then. Thank God things have changed. So it's a difficult viewing experience even today, and a much different viewing experience to back then. I don't think a film like this could be made today. Certainly not a big budget film. Well, no, not big budget, but a film made by a serious filmmaker would struggle to get made like this. And if it was, it wouldn't be shown widely. Onto the rewatch perspective, you can probably guess. Back when I was 17, it was the performance fascination. This De Niro guy really is as good as my parents think. His intensity and the craft, and Scorsese and everyone else involved with it. The violence blew me away. I grew up in a really stable home, a loving home, and I'd never seen domestic violence like this. I'd never heard about it like this. It just wasn't a thing that people talked about back then. And I never saw it, so I was shocked. Now, what do I think? Well, I'm more interested in the consequences of the actions and or what leads up to them, the psychological aspect of the film. And I'm interested in the emotional breakdown of LaMotta and the dynamic between the brothers, and watching that violence expanding beyond the boxing into life itself. I've been around long enough now. I've seen some people like this. I've heard about things like this. And the shock, yes, it's still there, but it's not as blatant as before. So I'm able to look beyond it and really get into some of the core emotions of the film. I don't see the fights first anymore. I see what they destroy, and in emotional terms as well. So there's a lot of reasons, why this film still endures. It's not just a sports film. I think it's a Trojan horse. The boxing is a bit of a Trojan horse to get all sorts of people to watch this film, and then I think a fair percentage of those people get obsessed with it as well and quote from it and talk about it. It's a study in self-destruction. It's just the total alignment of performance and direction and editing, everything that goes into a film. It works here. It's a perfect storm. It just refuses to give the viewer any emotional comfort. So it's realistic in that respect. This guy was a maniac. You know, like I said, he was there while the film was being made. He was egging them on. Scorsese just presents Jake LaMotta and his life as it was. So it's so real, and we don't often get films like this anymore. There's always a lighter edge to them generally, or there's a break for commercial reasons usually. You can see studio execs now going, you can't put this out, you've got to soften it. You can't have this guy doing that. You've got to, we'll have people walking out. Yeah, people probably did walk out of this. Different times though, filmmakers could be a bit more daring, and we didn't have a thing called the internet where people get cancelled all the time and get targeted. So it's good that we had the olden days for films like this. My final thoughts. For me, this film is always rewatchable, but not always comfortable. I think that's fair. It's not background cinema. It's not living, breathing wallpaper. You'll end up crazy if you watch this film or have it on in the background. It becomes part of you. I don't recommend that at all. You do need to be emotionally ready for it, but if you are and you're engaged in it, it is completely absorbing. Once you're in it, it just takes over. It's always at least a 9 out of 10 for me, sometimes a 10 out of 10. It's emotionally powerful, but essential. So there you go. I kind of like this film, and I recommend anyone to go and check it out. And whether you like it or not, at least you've had the experience. Anyhow, thanks for tuning in to this much longer episode. I promise this won't be the norm, but when I start talking about this film, it's hard for me to stop. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.